Picture a person sitting alone in their parked car. The engine is off, the driveway is quiet. Inside the house the lights are on, and a perfectly normal evening waits for them. They have the stable job, the required relationships, the clean bill of health, and the roof over their head. By every metric designed by society, this person's won the game. Yet as they grip the leather steering wheel, their knuckles turn white. A familiar crushing weight sits tight in the center of their chest. They stare blankly at the dashboard and ask themselves a question that feels like a physical ache. Why am I not happy? If you have ever found yourself in that exact seat, staring at a life that looks good on paper, while feeling an overwhelming sense of emotional emptiness, you are experiencing the most well-kept secret of modern psychology. For decades, an entire industry has brainwashed us. We are told that joy is a destination we must reach through sheer force of will. We download the meditation apps, we fill out the gratitude journals until our hands cramp. We arrange our morning routines with military precision, and we plaster positive affirmations on our bathroom mirrors. We treat happiness like a metric to be tracked, conquered, and maintained. The reality is entirely different. The chase itself is the poison. The very act of asking yourself if you are happy is the exact mechanism guaranteeing that you remain miserable. Chapter 1. The Happiness Paradox. We live in a culture obsessed with a daily emotional diagnostic. From the moment you open your eyes in the morning, a quiet timer starts ticking in the back of your mind. You stretch, your feet hit the floor, and the evaluation begins. You check your phone, you drink your water, and an internal auditor walks out with a clipboard, examining your mood. The auditor asks, "How do we feel today? Are we energized? Are we joyful? Are we vibrating at a high frequency?" When you orient your entire existence around this internal auditor, you turn your daily life into a pass or fail test. You are no longer living, you are performing for an audience of one. Think about the physical sensation of trying to force a positive mood. Your jaw tightens. Your breathing becomes shallow, trapped in the top of your lungs. Your shoulders creep up toward your ears. You are expending an immense amount of physical and cognitive energy trying to manufacture an emotion out of thin air. When the emotion refuses to appear, the brain registers this absence not as a neutral state, but as a severe failure. You look at your gratitude journal, you look at your comfortable life, and the internal auditor writes down a failing grade. The gap between how you think you are supposed to feel and how you actually feel creates a profound emotional dissonance. This is not a philosophical theory. It is a biological and psychological reality verified by clinical data. Dr. Iris Maus, a prominent psychologist and researcher at the University of California, Berkeley, dedicated her work to understanding the mechanics of human emotion. She uncovered a mechanism that completely shatters the self-help industry's foundation. In a landmark study published in the journal Emotion, her team discovered that individuals who place a high value on feeling happy are significantly more likely to experience depressive symptoms. To test this, the researchers looked at women under different levels of life stress. For the women experiencing high levels of severe, ongoing life stress, their happiness levels were understandably low, regardless of how much they valued joy. But the terrifying revelation came from the group of women experiencing low stress. These were individuals living secure, stable, relatively calm lives. In this low-stress group, the women who placed a massive importance on being happy were significantly unhappier than those who did not care about chasing joy. Let that sink in. When life is chaotic and hard, everyone struggles. But when life is good, the people who desperately want to be happy become miserable. Why does this happen? The researchers pinpointed the exact mechanism: disappointment. When you value happiness intensely, you set an impossible, utopian standard for your emotional state. You expect your days to feel like a soaring cinematic montage. Then a regular Tuesday arrives. You spill your coffee. You sit in traffic. You do laundry. None of these events are tragedies. They are just the mundane reality of human existence. But because you set the standard at pure joy, the mundane feels like a disaster. Your brain interprets this lack of euphoria as an error message. The internal auditor steps in and says, "We have no reason to be sad. The bills are paid. The sun is shining. Why is there a dull ache in our stomach?" Something must be broken. This creates a spiral of self-blame. You become stressed about not being happy, which generates more anxiety, which pushes the goal of happiness even further away. The pursuit of the emotion guarantees the destruction of the emotion. The payoff here? The single most actionable shift you can make in your daily routine is to fire the internal auditor. You must stop mood checking. You must grant yourself uncompromising permission to feel absolutely nothing. Emotional neutrality is not a disease. Waking up and feeling completely average with no soaring joy and no crushing sadness is the baseline of a healthy human nervous system. When you stop demanding that Tuesday morning provides a spiritual awakening, Tuesday morning becomes peaceful. But the paradox deepens. The internal auditor does not just destroy our relationship with ourselves. The relentless pursuit of happiness actively destroys our relationship with the rest of the human race. Consider the language we use when we talk about finding joy. We talk about my peace. We talk about finding my truth, protecting my energy, and designing my dream life. In Western culture, we have framed happiness as a solitary acquisition, like buying a luxury watch or a piece of real estate. We treat it as a personal asset to be hoarded. This framework creates a physical and psychological fortress around you. When you view happiness as a personal gain, every interaction with another human being becomes transactional. You start evaluating your friends, your family, and your colleagues through a selfish lens, asking, is this person bringing me joy, or are they draining my energy? If a friend goes through a severe crisis and needs your support, the internal auditor views their grief as a threat to your personal happiness. You pull away. You isolate yourself to protect your manufactured good vibes. Dr. Mouse and her research team wanted to see if this selfish pursuit had a measurable impact on human connection. In a follow-up study, they measured loneliness in people who heavily valued happiness. They did not just rely on self-reported questionnaires, they looked at the body's biological markers. They measured progesterone, a hormone closely linked to social bonding and affiliation. The results were chilling. The more people valued and pursued their own personal happiness, the lonelier they felt on a daily basis. Furthermore, when researchers experimentally induced people to value happiness by having them read materials, praising the benefits of joy, those participants exhibited a hormonal shift. Their bodies physically reacted by withdrawing from social connection. The chase forces your biology into a state of isolation. You sit in your apartment, surrounded by self-help books and scented candles, doing all the right things to protect your peace, and you feel a hollow, freezing chill in your chest. You have successfully protected your energy by locking everyone else out. You have made yourself the center of the universe, and the center of the universe is a very lonely place to be. To break this isolation, the solution is not to try harder to feel connected. The solution is to completely shift your target. Happiness cannot be approached directly. It operates like peripheral vision. When you stare directly at a faint star in the night sky, it disappears. But when you look slightly to the side, the star becomes visible. Joy operates by the exact same rules. It only emerges as a byproduct of aiming at something else. Psychologists refer to this alternative target as meaning. Unlike happiness, which is a fleeting, unstable emotional state dependent on perfect circumstances, meaning is a structural framework. Meaning does not ask, how good do I feel right now? Meaning asks, what is required of me right now? When you shift from chasing happiness to chasing meaning, your physical posture changes. You stop looking inward, obsessing over the knots in your stomach or the tension in your jaw. You look outward. You see a chaotic, difficult world, and you find a burden worth carrying. You help a neighbor. You commit to a craft. You raise a child. These acts are often stressful. They involve pain, frustration, and sacrifice. They do not produce a clean, unbroken stream of positive emotions. But in the quiet moments between the struggle, a deep, unshakable sense of satisfaction settles into your bones. You realize you haven't checked your mood in days because you have been too busy living. Yet, even when we understand that we need to stop mood checking and focus on meaning, an insidious trap remains. The self-help industry has mutated, creating a new layer of psychological torment. We know we shouldn't chase happiness directly, so instead, we start worrying about our relationship with happiness. Researchers Brett Ford and Felicia Zerwas mapped out this exact psychological fork in the road. They found that merely aspiring to have a good life is not inherently destructive. The true danger lies down a specific path they call concern about happiness. Imagine you are on a vacation you saved up for all year. You are sitting on a beautiful beach. The sun is warm on your skin. The water is a perfect crystal blue. For 3 minutes, you are entirely at peace, watching the waves roll in. Then the concern kicks in. A voice whispers, "Am I enjoying this enough? I paid a lot of money to be here. This is supposed to be the best week of the year. Am I maximizing my joy? What if I forget how good this feels tomorrow?" In a fraction of a second, the warmth of the sun vanishes. The beauty of the water becomes a backdrop to your internal anxiety. By judging the quality of your own experience, you infuse severe negativity directly into the present moment. You strangle the joy out of the experience by putting it under a microscope. This meta-worry, the act of stressing over your stress or being sad about your sadness, is the ultimate cage. You tell yourself that if you are not operating at peak joy during a vacation, a birthday party, or a holiday, there is a fundamental flaw in your psychological makeup. The only way to dismantle this cage is a radical act of surrender. You must completely drop the expectation of permanence. Your emotions are not a permanent architectural structure. They are weather. Sometimes a massive storm rolls in, bringing heavy rain and dark clouds. You feel the physical weight of sadness, the tight chest of anxiety, or the heat of anger. When you are caught in the concern trap, you stand in the rain and scream at the sky, demanding to know why it is raining, analyzing the rain and blaming yourself for getting wet. The radical surrender means you just let it rain. You acknowledge the heavy chest, you acknowledge the tired mind. You stop trying to force the clouds away with forced gratitude. You recognize that the storm is temporary, just as the bright, sunny days are temporary. By giving up the desperate need to control the weather, you reclaim your energy. You stop fighting your own biology. This brings us to the core, undeniable truth of the happiness paradox. The people who experience the most profound, enduring sense of well-being are the people who have completely stopped trying to measure it. They have accepted that a rich human life contains a full spectrum of experiences. It contains the sharp sting of grief, the dull ache of boredom, the quiet comfort of routine, and the sudden, unearned flashes of pure joy. They do not hoard the joy, and they do not run from the grief. They simply participate in the act of living. You must put down the clipboard. You must fire the internal auditor. Give up the exhausting performance of relentless positivity and allow yourself the quiet dignity of just being a normal, flawed, fluctuating human being. But a lingering question remains. If we manage to stop the daily diagnostic and we stop worrying about whether we are happy enough, we inevitably face the milestones of our lives. We still have goals. We still want the promotion, the new house, the better relationship. We tell ourselves that even if we stop obsessing over the daily mood, surely hitting those massive, life-altering milestones will finally bring a permanent sense of peace. So why is it that exactly 1 week after achieving the biggest goal of your life, you feel a terrifying, empty restlessness creeping right back into your chest? Chapter 2. The Hedonic Treadmill. Imagine the exact moment you finally get the call. You are holding your phone, pressing it against your ear, and the voice on the other end tells you that you got the job, the promotion, or the massive raise. The feeling is electric. Your heart hammers against your ribs. You stand up, pace around the room, and let out a laugh of pure, unadulterated relief. You call your family, you celebrate, and as your head hits the pillow that night, you think, "I have finally arrived. I will never have to worry about feeling inadequate or stressed again." Now fast forward exactly 180 days. You wake up. You put on the clothes you bought with your new salary. You drive the nicer car to the nicer office. You sit at your desk, stare at your screen, and a quiet, familiar restlessness creeps right back into your chest. You look around at the life you spent 5 years dreaming about, and you feel absolutely nothing. Instead of basking in permanent gratitude, your brain is already scanning the horizon, plotting the next promotion, the bigger house, the next escape. We are conditioned to believe that this return to emptiness is a personal failure. We tell ourselves we are ungrateful, greedy, or broken. We believe that if we were just better people, we would maintain the euphoria of our achievements forever. The reality is that your brain is functioning exactly the way it was designed to function. Your inability to sustain joy after a massive victory is not a moral failing. It is a biological law backed by some of the most startling psychological data ever recorded. In the late 1970s, researchers Philip Brickman, Dan Coates, and Ronnie Janoff-Bullman conducted a study that completely shattered our understanding of human achievement. They decided to look at the absolute extremes of human fortune. They found a group of people who had recently experienced the ultimate societal dream, winning the state lottery. These were individuals who went to sleep ordinary and woke up millionaires. To provide a contrast, the researchers also studied a group of people who had recently experienced a devastating tragedy, becoming paralyzed in catastrophic accidents. According to every assumption we hold about life, the lottery winners should have been floating on a cloud of permanent ecstasy, and the accident victims should have been trapped in a state of bottomless despair. When the researchers measured their baseline happiness, the results were deeply unsettling. Shortly after the events, the emotional spikes were present, but as time passed, a powerful leveling effect took over. The lottery winners were not significantly happier than a control group of ordinary, everyday people who had not won a dime. The initial rush of the money had completely evaporated, but the study revealed a secondary finding that was even darker. The lottery winners actually experienced a massive deficit in their ability to enjoy mundane, everyday pleasures. Before winning the money, they might have derived genuine joy from a warm cup of coffee, a good joke, or a walk through the park. After winning, the peak experience of becoming a millionaire acted like a blinding spotlight, washing out all the smaller lights in the room. By contrast, the accident victims, while struggling with physical limitations, often found renewed, profound appreciation for those exact same small mundane experiences. Brickman and his colleague Donald Campbell had coined a term for this phenomenon back in 1971, the hedonic treadmill. Picture a literal treadmill. When you first step on and hit the speed button, you have to run faster. Your heart rate spikes. You feel the effort. But within a few minutes, your body adjusts to the new pace. You're running faster, expending more energy, but you're staying in the exact same place. Your emotional system operates on the exact same mechanics. When your environment improves, your baseline expectations immediately rise to match it. You upgrade from a tiny apartment to a house. For 2 weeks, the space feels enormous. By week 3, the house just becomes where you live, and you start noticing that the kitchen cabinets need updating. The human mind possesses a terrifying ability to normalize the extraordinary. We look at this phenomenon and feel a deep sense of frustration. Why would nature design us to delete our own joy? Why can't we just reach a plateau of success and stay happy there? The answer lies in the harsh mechanics of evolutionary psychology. Your brain is not a happiness machine. It is a survival machine. Imagine our ancient ancestors living in a hostile, dangerous environment. If an early human managed to hunt down a large animal, feed their family, and secure a warm cave, they experienced a spike of satisfaction. If that satisfaction became permanent, if they felt a lingering, endless euphoria about their success, they would have sat around the fire, relaxed, and stopped looking for the next food source. They would have frozen to death or starved when the winter came. The humans who survived, the ones who passed their genes down to us, were the ones whose brains rapidly deleted the satisfaction of the last victory. Dissatisfaction is an evolutionary alarm clock. The restlessness you feel in your legs, the urge to keep scrolling, the sudden boredom with your current achievements, these are the modern manifestations of a primitive survival drive, pushing you to keep moving, keep hunting, keep securing resources. Your biological baseline is designed to be slightly dissatisfied. That quiet hum of discontent is not a disease. It is the engine of human progress. Every bridge built, every disease cured, and every piece of art created was born out of someone feeling the itch of the hedonic treadmill and deciding that the current reality was not enough. But when we do not understand this mechanism, we misinterpret the signal. We take the biological itch of dissatisfaction and try to scratch it by buying luxury items, chasing clout, and accumulating endless material wealth, believing that the next purchase will be the one that finally turns off the alarm. The only viable solution to this trap is a radical shift in your expectations. You must accept your baseline. Accepting your baseline does not mean giving up on your goals. It means detaching your internal peace from your external acquisitions. You pursue the promotion because the work is engaging, not because you think the new title will heal your childhood wounds. You buy the comfortable house because it serves your family, not because you think the square footage will fill the hole in your chest. When you stop demanding that your achievements act as permanent emotional cures, you rob the hedonic treadmill of its power over you. You experience the joy of the win. You watch the joy fade and you smile, knowing your biology is just resetting the board for the next game. This realization inevitably leads to a massive, uncomfortable question. If our minds are wired to delete our success, and we always return to our baseline, does that mean earning more money is completely pointless? Should we all just quit our stressful jobs, move to a cabin in the woods, and give up on financial ambition? For a long time, the self-help world promoted a specific narrative based on a famous 2010 study. You likely heard the rule repeated at dinner parties and in articles. Money only buys happiness up to $75,000 a year. After that, it makes no difference. People used this data point to claim that wealth was irrelevant to emotional well-being. But science rarely settles for a simple story. In 2023, two of the most prominent researchers in the field of psychology and economics, Daniel Kahneman and Matthew Killingsworth, joined forces to settle the debate through a massive adversarial collaboration study. They analyzed the data of tens of thousands of individuals, tracking their real-time moods against their income levels. What they found shattered the old myth and introduced a much more nuanced reality. They discovered that the $75,000 limit was only true for a very specific group of people, the deeply unhappy. For individuals suffering from severe clinical depression, profound loneliness, or intense grief, money stops helping once basic needs are met. If you are deeply miserable, going from $100,000 to $200,000 will not cure your misery. You just become a wealthy, miserable person. However, for the majority of people who have a healthy, stable emotional baseline, the plateau does not exist. For these people, happiness continues to rise steadily with their income, accelerating well past 6 figures and up to $500,000. Money does not create happiness out of thin air, but it acts as a massive emotional amplifier. When you have a solid baseline, meaning you have good relationships, a sense of purpose, and a healthy approach to your own flaws, money provides the ultimate modern resource, autonomy. It buys you out of toxic work environments. It buys you the time to spend with your aging parents. It buys you the ability to handle a medical emergency without experiencing a panic attack. The tension here is palpable. If you spend your life trying to fix a broken emotional baseline by grinding for a massive salary, you will end up exhausted and hollow. You will stare at your bank account and realize the money only amplified the void. But if you fix your baseline first, if you learn to accept the hedonic treadmill and find meaning in the daily struggle, then acquiring wealth becomes a powerful tool to expand your freedom. You must stop using money as a bandage for your internal wounds and start using it as fuel for your autonomy. But if we accept our baseline, if we stop expecting the next milestone to be a magical cure, and if we realize that wealth is merely an amplifier, does that mean we just surrender to a life of emotional flatness? Do we just grit our teeth, accept that joy is fleeting, and march through the gray machinery of daily life? No. We have to learn how to process our emotions without fighting them, which brings us to the danger of the self-help world's most toxic command. Chapter 3. The Danger of Toxic Positivity. You are standing in the softly lit lobby of a funeral home, or perhaps you are sitting in the sterile break room of your office holding a cardboard box because you just found out your department was eliminated. Your world has just shattered. The floor has dropped out from underneath you, and you are currently suspended in the terrible, weightless freefall of genuine grief. Someone approaches you. It is a well-meaning friend, a distant relative, or a former colleague. They look at your devastated face, they put a warm hand on your trembling shoulder, and they say the 6 most universally destructive words in the English language. Everything happens for a reason. Look on the bright side. Pay close attention to what happens inside your physical body in that exact fraction of a second. Your jaw tightens so hard your teeth ache. A sudden sharp drop occurs in the pit of your stomach. Your hands clench into fists inside your pockets. A hot, prickling wave of quiet rage bubbles up the back of your neck. You are drowning in a sea of despair, and this person has just handed you a brightly colored balloon instead of a life raft. But because you are a polite, socially conditioned human being, you swallow the rage. You force the corners of your mouth upward. You nod, let out a hollow breath, and say, "You're right. I just need to stay positive." In that moment, you have just swallowed poison. We live in a culture that operates under a relentless, dictatorial regime of forced optimism. We are surrounded by a pervasive, good vibes only aesthetic that demands we view every tragedy as a hidden blessing, every failure as a stepping stone, and every moment of agonizing pain as a beautiful opportunity for personal growth. You cannot scroll through a social media feed without being bombarded by pastel-colored quote cards, demanding that you choose joy, manifest abundance, or smile through the storm. We are told that negative emotions are low-frequency vibrations that will ruin our lives, repel success, and make us a burden to the people around us. When tragedy, burnout, or intense psychological distress hits, this cultural narrative pressures us to immediately mask our genuine pain behind a fabricated, cheerful facade. We are not allowed to just be broken. We are expected to instantly sanitize our suffering so it is palatable for public consumption. But forcing a relentless, synthetic optimism does not cure the pain. It creates a psychological condition known as toxic positivity. When you are forced to paint over a rotting wall, the wall does not become structurally sound. It simply rots in the dark until the entire house collapses. The biological and psychological friction of hiding your true state creates severe emotional dissonance. You are feeling one thing deeply, but your face, your voice, and your body language are desperately trying to project the exact opposite. This is not just exhausting, it is medically dangerous. Psychological researchers Brett Ford and Iris Mouse, who we discussed earlier, published critical findings regarding the mechanisms of emotional suppression. They wanted to understand what actually happens to a human being when they actively try to suppress, hide, or alter a negative emotional state. The data is entirely unequivocal. The social pressure to suppress negative emotions and artificially inflate positive ones acts as a massive, heavy predictor of worsening depressive symptoms. When you experience a negative emotion, it is essentially an electrical charge running through your nervous system. If you acknowledge the charge, process it, and allow it to pass, it eventually grounds itself. But when you suppress it, when you slap a fake smile on your face and tell everyone you are doing great, you are trapping that electrical charge inside a closed circuit. The energy has nowhere to go. It bounces around your nervous system, amplifying anxiety, feeding a deep sense of shame and virtually guaranteeing emotional burnout. Your brain registers the gap between your devastating reality and your forced smile as a threat. You begin to feel alienated from your own mind. You start believing that because you cannot just look on the bright side, you are fundamentally broken. You feel an immense crushing shame for being depressed, which simply adds a second, heavier layer of depression on top of the original wound. The single most powerful shift you can grant yourself in these moments is uncompromising emotional validation. You must give yourself the radical permission to feel absolutely terrible when things are absolutely terrible. Authentic emotional processing is a far healthier, far more resilient survival tool than a fabricated smile. When a loved one dies, it is supposed to ruin you for a while. When you lose a job you loved, you are supposed to feel terrified and inadequate. When a relationship ends, you are supposed to feel an agonizing, physical ache in the center of your chest. These are not signs of mental weakness. They are the correct biological responses of a functioning human nervous system reacting to loss. Validating that pain, saying out loud, "This is a nightmare and I'm not okay," is the only mechanism that allows the pain to actually begin metabolizing. But the danger of toxic positivity extends far beyond personal tragedies and funerals. It is woven into the very fabric of how we survive in our daily environments, specifically in the workplace. Think about the physical manifestation of what psychologists call surface acting. You arrive at your job. You are sleep-deprived, dealing with a financial crisis at home and fighting off a cold. Your body feels like it is made of lead. But you are a customer service representative, a nurse, a manager, or a salesperson. You step through the double doors, and the performance begins. You physically alter the pitch of your voice, raising it half an octave to sound more enthusiastic. You stretch your lips over your teeth in a smile that does not reach the tiny muscles around your eyes. You laugh at jokes that aren't funny. You swallow the sharp defensive retort when a client speaks to you disrespectfully. For 8, 10, or 12 hours a day, you are essentially an actor performing a grueling, one-person play, violently suppressing your internal reality to maintain the required corporate cheerfulness. This surface acting is not just a polite social skill. It is a brutal form of emotional labor that ravages your biology. In a landmark 2020 study focusing on the effects of emotional labor on the human body, researchers examined a highly stressed demographic: Chinese hospital nurses. The researchers didn't just ask the nurses how they felt on a questionnaire. They wanted cold, hard biological proof of what faking a smile does to a human being. To find this, they took 1 centimeter hair samples from the nurses. Why hair? Because as hair grows, it captures the biological history of the body, specifically trapping cortisol, the primary stress hormone. By analyzing the cortisol levels in the hair segments, the researchers could literally read the historical stress levels the nurses had endured over the past month. The researchers then cross-referenced these physical cortisol levels with the nurses' self-reported emotional labor strategies, specifically how often they engaged in surface acting, faking emotions they didn't feel, versus expressing their naturally felt emotions. The findings were a devastating indictment of forced positivity. The nurses who frequently engaged in surface acting, putting on the brave face, suppressing their exhaustion, and faking a cheerful demeanor for the patients and doctors, exhibited massively elevated levels of emotional exhaustion and job burnout. But the terrifying part was the biological interaction. The nurses, who had inherently high biological stress reactivity, indicated by high hair cortisol levels, suffered the most profound, catastrophic emotional exhaustion when forced to engage in high levels of surface acting. In simple terms, when your body is already screaming in a state of high stress and you force your face to smile, you are essentially pouring gasoline onto a biological fire. Your body is not stupid. When you force a smile, your brain knows you are lying. It detects the massive discrepancy between the internal alarm bells ringing in your amygdala and the artificial calm you are projecting with your facial muscles. To maintain that lie, your nervous system has to work overtime, pumping out more adrenaline and more cortisol to keep the performance going. This leads to severe cardiovascular stress, chronic fatigue, and a total depletion of your immune system. You aren't just burning out mentally. Your organs are taking a beating from the toxic positivity you are forcing yourself to project. The solution to this biological toll is the active pursuit of emotional consonance. Emotional consonance means aligning your external expression with your internal reality. Now, this does not mean you can throw a screaming tantrum in the middle of a board meeting or verbally abuse a customer because you are having a bad day. Professionalism still requires regulation, but it does mean you stop the surface acting. It means you allow your face to rest in a neutral expression. It means you lower the pitch of your voice to its natural cadence. It means you respond to a frustrating situation with calm, firm reality rather than a high-pitched fake giggle of appeasement. When a coworker asks how you are doing, you stop saying, "living the dream," and start saying, "it's a tough week, but I'm managing." By closing the massive, exhausting gap between how you feel and how you act, you instantly stop the biological leakage of your energy. You stop punishing your nervous system for telling the truth. However, when we decide to drop the fake smiles and stop participating in the toxic positivity circus, we often run headfirst into a terrifying new problem. If we stop trying to force ourselves to be happy all the time, do we just surrender to a life of bleak, overwhelming despair? If the bright side is a lie, is the only alternative the dark side? This is where we must distinguish between toxic positivity and the powerful, deeply necessary psychological tool known as emotional agility. Dr. Susan David, a renowned psychologist on the faculty of Harvard Medical School, has dedicated her career to studying how humans navigate their inner worlds. She recognized early on that the cultural obsession with forced happiness was breaking people. Her insight didn't just come from a laboratory, it came from profound personal trauma. When Dr. David was 16 years old, her father was diagnosed with terminal cancer. As her family faced the absolute darkest chapter of their lives, well-meaning friends and relatives flooded them with the classic toxic positivity platitudes. They were told that if they just believed, he would be okay. They were pressured to stay positive, to keep hoping, and to never accept defeat. In hindsight, Dr. David realized how incredibly destructive that tyranny of positivity actually was. By forcing the family to constantly look toward a fabricated, miraculous horizon, the toxic positivity robbed them of the present reality. It prevented them from authentically grieving. It prevented them from spending authentic time together, wrapped in the profound heartbreak that happens when people acknowledge the end is near. Forced hope became a barrier to genuine connection. Through her subsequent decades of research, Dr. David formulated the concept of emotional agility. Toxic positivity and deep despair both share a common, fatal flaw. They are rigid. When you practice toxic positivity, you are rigid. You refuse to accept the complex, messy reality of a situation, demanding that it fit into a cheerful little box. But similarly, when you drown in despair and let a negative emotion entirely consume your identity, you are also being rigid. You become trapped in the darkness, unable to see anything else. Rigidity in the face of a complex world is what breaks the human mind. Emotional agility is the antidote. It is the ability to navigate life's twists and turns with self-acceptance, clear-sightedness, and an open mind. It is not about ignoring difficult emotions, nor is it about wallowing in them. It is about learning how to hold your emotions loosely. Think about how we typically describe our negative feelings. We say, "I am angry." We say, "I am sad." We say, "I am overwhelmed." Look at the language. I am. You are using the verb of identity. You are physically and psychologically fusing yourself with the temporary emotional state. You are declaring that your entire being is made of anger, sadness, or overwhelm. When you identify as the emotion, you have no space to maneuver. The emotion is the master, and you are the captive. The payoff here, the single most powerful shift in your internal vocabulary, is to create space between the thinker and the thought. You must unhook yourself from the emotion. Instead of saying, "I am sad," you practice emotional agility by saying, "I am noticing that I am feeling sad." Instead of saying, "I am angry," you say, "I am experiencing the physical sensation of anger right now." This is not just semantics. This is a profound neurological intervention. By shifting your language, you immediately step out of the storm and into the role of the observer. You activate the prefrontal cortex, the logical reasoning center of your brain, which naturally begins to down-regulate the panic sirens going off in your amygdala. You realize that you are not the storm, you are the sky. The weather will change, the storm will pass, and the sky will remain. When you practice emotional agility, you stop fighting your emotions. You treat them like data. A feeling of deep anxiety is not a sign that you are a failure. It is simply a data point indicating that you care deeply about the outcome of an upcoming event. A feeling of intense frustration is not a sign that you are toxic. It is a data point showing that your boundaries are being crossed. When you stop trying to forcibly paint these data points with a cheerful brush, you can actually use the information to make better decisions. You can say, "I am noticing that I feel completely burned out by this relationship." That is valid data. Now, what values-connected step can I take to address it? This brings us to the final and perhaps most difficult aspect of dismantling toxic positivity. It is one thing to grant yourself permission to feel your own pain. It is an entirely different, infinitely harder challenge to stop imposing toxic positivity on the people you love. Why do we tell our grieving friends to look on the bright side? Why do we rush to point out the silver lining when our partner comes home crying about a terrible day at work? We do it because their pain makes us deeply physically uncomfortable. Human beings are wired for empathy. When someone you care about is sitting in front of you, weeping, your mirror neurons fire. You actually begin to feel a shadow of their distress in your own body. Your chest tightens, your breathing becomes shallow. The discomfort is intense, and your brain instantly shifts into problem-solving mode. You want to extinguish their pain, not just because you love them, but because their pain is causing you pain. So you reach for the quickest, cheapest fire extinguisher available, toxic positivity. You say, at least you still have your health. You say, time heals all wounds. You try to silver line their tragedy, to make the bad feelings go away, so that you can feel comfortable again. But empathy is not about fixing. Sympathy is looking down into a dark hole where someone is trapped, shouting, "Hey, it's pretty bad down there, but at least it's not raining." Sympathy drives disconnection. True empathy requires you to climb down into the dark, terrifying hole. It requires you to sit in the dirt, in the pitch black, right next to the person who is suffering. It requires you to look around at the darkness and say, "I am here. I see how incredibly dark this is. And this absolutely sucks." When you stop trying to fix people, you give them the greatest gift one human can give another, the gift of being seen. You validate their reality. You let them know that their grief is not a burden. Their anger is justified, and their pain does not need to be sanitized for your comfort. The physical relief a person feels when they are finally allowed to just be miserable in the presence of another human being is staggering. The shoulders drop. The frantic, shallow breathing slows down. The defensive walls crumble. By simply acknowledging the darkness without trying to inject a fake light, you actually create a genuine, authentic connection that no amount of forced cheerfulness could ever achieve. We must burn down the toxic positivity industry. We must reject the relentless pressure to perform our lives like a perfectly curated highlight reel. We must embrace the reality of the human experience, the understanding that life is beautiful, deeply meaningful, and simultaneously filled with unavoidable, devastating suffering. When you finally stop chasing the illusion of permanent happiness, when you put down the exhausting burden of surface acting, and when you allow yourself and the people around you to feel the full, messy spectrum of human emotion, you suddenly find something much better than a fleeting good mood. You find authenticity. You find a deep, unshakable grounding in reality. You find that you are strong enough to endure the storm without having to pretend the sun is shining. But once we strip away the fake smiles, and once we stop trying to endlessly acquire new achievements to satisfy the hedonic treadmill, we are left standing in a stark, quiet reality. The noise is gone. The performative joy is gone. So, what do we actually do with our time? What fills the void when we are no longer running on the hamster wheel of self-help optimization? If the goal isn't to be happy, and the goal isn't to be constantly positive, how do we engage with the hours in our day to build a life that actually feels worth living? The answer isn't an emotion at all. It is a biological and psychological state of profound, ego-dissolving action. A state where you completely forget yourself. Chapter 4. Flow over fleeting euphoria. It is 11 o'clock at night. The lights in your bedroom are off, but your face is bathed in a pale, cold blue glow. You lie on your side, one eye pressed into the pillow, the other locked on the glass rectangle in your hand. Your thumb moves in a rhythmic, mechanical swipe. Up, pause, up, pause. You watch 10 seconds of a stranger dancing, 15 seconds of a political argument, 5 seconds of a dog falling off a couch, and a 30-second clip of a podcast you will never actually listen to. Notice your physical body in this exact moment. Your breathing is shallow, trapped in the upper ridge of your collarbones. Your eyes are dry, burning from a lack of blinking. The muscles in your forearm ache from holding the device at an unnatural angle. Your brain feels like it is wrapped in wet cotton. You are not laughing. You are not learning. You are not experiencing joy. Yet an invisible magnetic force prevents you from locking the screen and going to sleep. You tell yourself, just one more video, just one more post to end on a good note. But the good note never arrives. When we abandon the active pursuit of fabricated happiness and step off the hedonic treadmill, we are met with a profound, terrifying silence. For a brief window of time, the performative noise of our lives stops. But human beings despise a vacuum. When the silence gets too loud, a primal panic sets in. We realize that if we are not chasing the next big promotion and we are not forcing a fake smile, we are left alone with our own thoughts. To escape this terrifying intimacy with ourselves, we seek anesthesia. We turn to the cheapest, most abundant resource of the digital age, frictionless dopamine. We convince ourselves that we are seeking entertainment. We tell our friends we are just unwinding after a long day of corporate surface acting. But the statistics reveal a much darker reality. According to comprehensive digital behavior data published in 2024, the average internet user around the world now spends over 6.5 hours a day staring at a screen. For younger demographics, like Generation Z in the United States, that number climbs past 7 hours of smartphone use alone, independent of television or computer work. Consider the sheer volume of a human lifespan dedicated to the screen. If you spend 7 hours a day scrolling, you are forfeiting nearly a third of your waking existence to a digital void. This behavior is not a character flaw. It is a biological hijacking. When you engage with algorithmic content, your brain releases dopamine. Popular culture mislabels dopamine as the pleasure chemical. We assume that a rush of dopamine means a rush of happiness. But neuroscientists know that dopamine is actually the chemical of craving. It is the molecule of anticipation. It evolved to keep our ancient ancestors motivated to hunt for food, seek shelter, and reproduce. Dopamine does not reward you for finding the prize. It rewards you for the act of searching. Modern technology weaponizes this exact survival mechanism. The infinite scroll of a social media feed is a digital slot machine. Your brain never knows if the next swipe will yield a boring advertisement or an incredibly stimulating piece of gossip. That unpredictability sends your dopamine system into overdrive. Your thumb keeps swiping because your biology believes you are hunting for critical survival resources in the brush. But this endless hunt carries a massive biological tax. When you flood your nervous system with cheap unearned dopamine spikes, your brain attempts to protect itself from the overload. It initiates a process called downregulation. It removes dopamine receptors. The next day you need to scroll for 2 hours to feel the same baseline level of stimulation that used to take 20 minutes. You develop a tolerance. When you unplug, when the screen goes dark, the dopamine drops off a cliff. This creates a withdrawal state characterized by intense irritability, lethargy, and a creeping sense of despair. The boredom feels physically painful. You cannot sit through a movie without checking your phone. You cannot wait in line at the grocery store without checking your inbox. You have conditioned your nervous system to require a relentless stream of micro-stimulations just to avoid feeling empty. We run to these cheap thrills hoping they will distract us from the void. But the distraction is an illusion. We are not experiencing fulfillment. We are experiencing sedation. We are numbing the internal auditor, but we are also numbing our capacity for genuine passion. If forced positivity is a poison and cheap dopamine is a sedative, what is the actual cure for the modern malaise? How do we engage with the world in a way that feels deeply, undeniably vital? The answer requires us to travel back to the mid-20th century and examine the life of a young boy in war-torn Europe. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi was born in Hungary in the 1930s. During his childhood, the devastation of the Second World War shattered his reality. He watched the adults around him completely collapse, people who had built their entire identities around their wealth, their social status, or their careers, lost everything when the bombs fell and the borders dissolved. Stripped of their external markers of success, many of these adults lost their minds. They had no internal fortress. But young Mihaly noticed something extraordinary amidst the rubble. A small handful of people managed to retain a sense of profound dignity and purpose, even in the absolute darkest of circumstances. He became obsessed with understanding how a human being could maintain their sanity and find meaning when the world was burning down around them. As a teenager, he found himself in an Italian internment camp. Surrounded by misery, barbed wire, and fear, he stumbled upon the game of chess. When he sat at the wooden board and studied the pieces, a miraculous shift occurred in his consciousness. The prison vanished, the hunger in his stomach faded, The fear of the future evaporated. For hours at a time, his mind was entirely absorbed in the complex geometry of the game. He discovered a psychological portal that allowed him to step completely outside of his own suffering. Years later, Csikszentmihalyi immigrated to the United States, earned his doctorate in psychology from the University of Chicago, and dedicated his life to studying this exact phenomenon. He wanted to know how humans could access that portal of intense, reality-altering focus, and what it meant for our overall sense of well-being. At the time, psychological research focused almost exclusively on pathology. Scientists studied depression, anxiety, trauma, and neurosis. They wanted to know what made humans break. Csikszentmihalyi took the opposite approach. He wanted to know what made humans soar. To study this, he pioneered a groundbreaking research technique called the experience sampling method. In the 1970s and 80s, before smartphones existed, he gave his research subjects electronic pagers. He gathered people from all walks of life: assembly line workers, surgeons, rock climbers, chess players, farmers, and artists. Throughout the day, at completely random intervals, the researchers would beep the participants. When the pager went off, the subject had to immediately stop what they were doing and fill out a detailed questionnaire recording their exact thoughts, feelings, and level of engagement in that precise moment. Over the course of decades, collecting millions of data points from around the globe, an undeniable structural pattern emerged. The data revealed that human beings do not experience their highest levels of happiness when they are resting. We assume that our ideal state is lounging on a beach with a cocktail, free from all responsibility. But the beeper data proved otherwise. When people were passive, watching television, lying in bed, or idling, they reported high levels of apathy, boredom, and low-grade anxiety. The moments when people reported the most profound, enduring sense of satisfaction occurred when their minds and bodies were stretched to their absolute limits, in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. Csikszentmihalyi coined a term for this state of being. He called it flow. He chose the word because when participants described the experience, they frequently used the metaphor of water. They felt as if a current was carrying them along. In a flow state, every action, movement, and thought follows inevitably from the previous one, like playing a seamless piece of jazz music. But flow does not happen by accident. It is an incredibly specific psychological state that only ignites when precise environmental conditions are met. The primary trigger for entering flow is the friction between challenge and skill. Imagine a graph. On the vertical axis, you have the level of challenge a task presents. On the horizontal axis, you have your current level of skill. If you attempt a task where the challenge is incredibly high but your skill is low, your nervous system registers a threat. You feel overwhelmed, panicked, and anxious. And if you sit down at a piano having never played before, and someone demands you play Beethoven in front of an audience, you do not experience flow, you experience terror. Conversely, if your skill is high but the challenge is low, your brain disengages. You feel profound boredom. If an expert pianist is forced to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star for 3 hours, their mind will wander. They will start thinking about their grocery list, their relationship problems, and their impending mortality. Flow exists in the narrow, precise diagonal channel running directly between anxiety and boredom. You must engage in a task that requires your absolute best effort. The task must stretch your capabilities to the very edge of your competence, demanding total concentration, but it must remain just within the realm of possibility. When you hit that Goldilocks zone, the portal opens. But what actually happens inside the human brain when the portal opens? Why does the friction of a difficult task produce a feeling of such overwhelming peace? For decades, psychologists understood the psychological markers of flow, but the biological mechanics remained a mystery. We knew what it felt like, but we didn't know what the neurons were doing. In 2003, a neuroscientist named Arne Dietrich proposed a radical, game-changing framework called the transient hypofrontality hypothesis. To understand this concept, you have to understand the architecture of your own brain. Behind your forehead sits the prefrontal cortex. This is the newest, most evolved part of the human brain. It is the CEO of your consciousness. The prefrontal cortex handles executive function, logical reasoning, and long-term planning. But more importantly, it houses your sense of time, your sense of morality, and your sense of self. Remember the internal auditor we discussed in the first chapter? The voice that constantly asks, "Am I happy right now? Am I good enough? What do other people think of me?" That auditor lives in the prefrontal cortex. Specifically, it operates through a web of neural connections known as the default mode network, or the DMN. The default mode network is the biological seat of the ego. It is the narrator in your head. When you are standing in the shower replaying an argument you had 3 years ago, your DMN is firing. When you are lying in bed terrified about a meeting scheduled for next Tuesday, your DMN is firing. The default mode network constantly scans the past for regrets and scans the future for threats, constructing the rigid, continuous narrative of you. Prior to Dietrich's hypothesis, scientists assumed that to achieve a state of peak performance like flow, the brain must be functioning at maximum capacity. They believed that a concert pianist playing a flawless sonata must have every part of their brain lit up and firing. Dietrich suggested the exact opposite. Hypofrontality means a decrease in frontal brain activity. Transient means it is temporary. During a flow state, your brain does not turn on, it actively shuts down. Because the task at hand requires an immense, unprecedented amount of computational power, the brain must conserve energy. It takes the resources away from the prefrontal cortex and the default mode network, and reallocates them to the sensory and motor areas required for the task. The CEO steps out of the room, the internal auditor is fired, the narrator goes silent. This biological deactivation explains the most powerful, life-altering symptom of the flow state: ego dissolution. When the default mode network powers down, the boundary between you and the task physically evaporates in your neural circuitry. You stop observing yourself. You stop judging your performance. You stop worrying about your salary, your relationship status, and your physical appearance. The heavy, exhausting burden of being an individual human being with a past and a future is completely lifted. You are no longer a person holding a paintbrush. You become the painting. You are no longer a person writing a line of code. You become the logic. You are no longer a skier navigating a mountain. You become the descent. Furthermore, because the prefrontal cortex is the area of the brain that computes the passage of time, transient hypofrontality causes massive time distortion. 5 hours can pass in what feels like 5 minutes, or a single second of a complex physical maneuver can stretch out into an eternity of hyper-focused clarity. Why does ego dissolution bring us the highest levels of human satisfaction? Because you cannot be sad if you do not exist. You cannot feel anxious about the future if the biological hardware required to compute the future is temporarily unplugged. This is the ultimate paradox of human fulfillment. We spend our entire lives obsessing over ourselves. We buy self-help books to fix our trauma. We buy expensive clothes to curate our image. We chase milestones to build our legacy. We treat the self like a monument that must be polished and protected at all costs. Yet, the data and the neuroscience prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the most profound peace a human can experience arrives in the exact moment the self is completely forgotten. Flow provides a vacation from your own ego. Compare this biological reality to the experience of cheap dopamine. When you are doom scrolling on your phone, you are not engaging in transient hypofrontality. Your default mode network is highly active. You are looking at a photo of a wealthy celebrity on a yacht, and your DMN immediately calculates the gap between their life and yours. You feel a pang of envy. You feel a sense of inadequacy. You are intensely aware of yourself, your physical discomfort, and your boredom. Entertainment keeps you trapped inside the cage of your own ego. Engagement sets you free. This brings us to the payoff, the radical, actionable mandate you must apply to your daily routine if you want to escape the modern trap of anxiety and numbness. You must seek engagement over entertainment. You must transition from a passive consumer of digital stimuli to an active participant in reality. You must architect your life to ensure that you collide with friction every single day. Look at your current schedule. Examine the hours between the end of your workday and the moment you go to sleep. For most adults, this window is a wasteland of exhaustion and sedation. We collapse onto the couch, turn on a streaming service, and let the algorithm dictate our emotional state until our eyes close. You must reclaim this territory. You must establish a daily practice of cultivating flow. This does not require you to become an extreme athlete or a concert pianist. Flow can be engineered into almost any pursuit, provided it meets the criteria of high challenge, matching skill, and clear immediate feedback. It might mean buying a set of woodworking tools and attempting to build a crooked, imperfect chair in your garage. It might mean learning a complex new language, stumbling through the vocabulary, and feeling the intense cognitive friction of rewiring your vocal cords. It might mean pulling out a blank canvas and struggling to capture the geometry of an apple with cheap acrylic paint. It might mean engaging in deep, complex gardening, where you must calculate soil acidity, sunlight angles, and moisture levels. When you first begin this practice, your brain will violently resist it. Remember, you have conditioned your nervous system to expect cheap, effortless dopamine. When you sit down to learn the guitar, your fingers will hurt, the chords will sound terrible, the challenge will drastically outweigh your skill, and you will feel a sharp spike of frustration. Your brain will scream at you to put the guitar down and pick up your phone. The phone offers immediate comfort. The phone requires zero friction. The internal auditor will whisper, "You are terrible at this, you are wasting your time. Why are you working so hard during your leisure hours?" This is the crucible. This is the moment where 99% of people fail. They mistake the initial friction for permanent failure, and they retreat to the couch. You must push through the initial wall of frustration. You must endure the awkward, clumsy phase of skill acquisition. As you practice, your skill level will slowly rise to meet the challenge. The chords will start to ring clear. The grammar of the new language will start to make sense. The wood will yield to the saw. And then, one random evening, the magic will happen. You will sit down to practice and the room will go quiet. The relentless chatter in your head will cease. You will look at the clock, expecting it to be 8:30, and you will realize with a shock that it is past midnight. You will feel a deep, vibrating sense of calm in your chest. You will realize that for the last 4 hours, you were not worrying about your boss, you were not regretting your past, and you were not wondering if you were happy. You simply were. You will have accessed the portal. You will have achieved ego dissolution without drugs, without toxic positivity, and without spending a dime on a luxury vacation. You will have built an internal fortress that no algorithm and no societal pressure can penetrate. When you make flow a daily requirement, your baseline reality changes. You stop demanding that every moment of your life provides a spike of euphoric joy. You stop expecting the hedonic treadmill to deliver permanent satisfaction. You stop running from the void, because you have learned how to fill the void with deliberate, meaningful action. You build a profound sense of self-respect. You realize that your mind is capable of extraordinary depth, provided you give it a task worthy of its power. You look at the glowing rectangles in your pocket not as lifelines but as tools, tools that are far less interesting than the chaotic, tangible, demanding physical world in front of you. But as powerful and necessary as the flow state is, a critical vulnerability remains in this architecture. If you spend your entire life alone in a garage building perfect furniture, or alone in a room mastering a complex video game, you can certainly achieve flow. You can dissolve your ego and escape the internal auditor. But flow by itself is a solitary mechanism. It is an individualistic pursuit. If you use flow simply to hide from the world, you create a beautiful, highly engaged prison. The human nervous system did not evolve merely to master complex tasks in isolation. We are deeply, biologically wired for tribal connection. The ultimate realization of meaning cannot be found entirely inside your own head, even when that head is operating at peak performance. To take the profound peace you discover in the flow state and weave it into a resilient, lifelong framework of genuine fulfillment, you have to break the final, most deeply ingrained habit of the modern era. You have to stop looking at the world as a resource to be extracted and completely rethink your relationship with the human race. You must learn how to take the quiet, focused energy you have cultivated and aim it directly outward. Chapter 5. The Contribution Reset. Picture the modern sanctuary of self-care. It is a Sunday evening. You are sitting in a perfectly temperature-controlled room. The lights are dimmed to a warm amber. You have a premium sheet mask on your face, a cup of expensive herbal tea steaming on the table, and a journal resting in your lap. You have spent the entire weekend setting boundaries, protecting your peace, and engaging in aggressive self-care. You have completely isolated yourself from the messy, demanding outside world because modern culture told you that to find happiness, you must ruthlessly prioritize yourself. But notice the physical sensation underneath that expensive sheet mask. There is a tight, dry constriction in your throat. The silence of the room does not feel peaceful. It feels heavy, like a thick lead blanket pressing down on your chest. You look at your phone, hoping someone has reached out, but you have successfully trained everyone to leave you alone. You have built a flawless fortress of absolute independence, and as you sit inside it, listening to the loud thud of your own heartbeat, you realize with a cold spike of dread that you are completely undeniably miserable. This is the ultimate paradox of the modern self-help movement, and it shatters our deepest expectations about how a good life is actually built. For the past 50 years, we have been sold a massive, highly lucrative lie. We have been taught to view happiness as a highly individualistic, isolated pursuit. The cultural messaging is relentless. Focus on yourself, find your own truth, cut out anything that drains your energy, and maximize your own emotional returns. We look at the world, our relationships, and our communities, and we constantly ask the exact same selfish question. What can you give me? How can this interaction serve my personal journey? But treating happiness as a solo sport is a guaranteed path to profound isolation. The more you obsess over your own emotional state, the more you sever your fundamental connection to humanity. To understand why this hyper-individualistic approach destroys our well-being, we have to look at the psychological friction between how we live today and how human beings actually evolved to survive. Researchers who study cross-cultural psychology frequently examine the differences between societies built on individualism versus those built on collectivism. In heavily individualistic cultures, like the United States and much of Western Europe, the core belief is that every person is a separate, autonomous being whose primary goal is to reach self-satisfaction and fulfill their unique potential. The individual is the absolute center of the universe. In contrast, collectivistic cultures view the individual as just one interwoven thread in a much larger social fabric. The group's survival and harmony take precedence over a single person's temporary emotional state. When psychologists measure the well-being of these different societies, a striking pattern emerges. While highly individualistic cultures often generate immense economic wealth and technological innovation, they are simultaneously plagued by epidemics of loneliness, clinical anxiety, and deep social alienation. When you are the absolute center of your own universe, every failure is entirely your fault. Every stressor rests entirely on your shoulders, and every negative emotion feels like a catastrophic personal defect. You become trapped in an echo chamber with your own insecurities. When we constantly engage in mood checking, the act of stopping every few hours to analyze our internal emotional state, we actively amplify this isolation. Mood checking forces you to look inward, plunging your attention deep into the dark, tangled machinery of your own ego. You cannot connect with another human being if your eyes are constantly rolled back into your own head, scanning for emotional injuries. Our intuition tells us that to be happy, we must hoard our resources. We believe that if we keep our time, our money, and our energy strictly to ourselves, we will build a stockpile of security that will eventually translate into joy. We view external demands as threats to our peace, but biological science completely dismantles this assumption, proving that the exact opposite is true. In 2008, a team of researchers led by Dr. Elizabeth Dunn at the University of British Columbia, alongside colleagues from Harvard Business School, conducted an experiment that flipped the entire concept of personal acquisition upside down. They wanted to know if spending money, the ultimate individualistic resource, could actually buy happiness if it was aimed in a radically different direction. The researchers walked up to random people on a university campus and handed them an envelope containing either $5 or $20. But there was a catch. Half of the participants were given a standard individualistic instruction. They had to spend the money on themselves by the end of the day. They could buy a coffee, a snack, or a small trinket. The other half were given a contrarian instruction. They had to spend the money on someone else. They could buy a gift for a friend, donate it to a charity, or buy a meal for a homeless person. According to the rules of basic economics and modern self-care, the people who kept the money should have felt better. They increased their personal net worth and acquired a physical good for their own enjoyment. But when the researchers called the participants that evening to measure their emotional state, the data told an entirely different story. The individuals who spent the windfall on themselves experienced absolutely no measurable change in their baseline happiness. The coffee was consumed, the dopamine faded, and they returned exactly to their normal, flat emotional state. However, the participants who were forced to spend the money on others reported a massive, statistically significant surge in their happiness. Furthermore, the amount of money did not matter. Giving away $5 produced the exact same powerful psychological boost as giving away $20. The physical reality of this shift is profound. Think about the last time you bought a small gift for someone you care about and watch them open it. Notice what happened in your body in that exact fraction of a second. The tight, anxious knot in your stomach uncoiled. Your chest expanded. Your breathing deepened, dropping from your collarbones down into your diaphragm. A warm, steady sensation flooded your nervous system. You were no longer obsessing over your own flaws or your own stress. Your attention was entirely captured by the joy of another human being. This phenomenon, known as the prosocial spending effect, has been replicated in over 130 countries around the world, across radically different income levels and cultural backgrounds. It is not a learned cultural behavior, it is a hardwired biological mechanism. Human beings are deeply, fundamentally designed to derive our greatest emotional rewards from the act of contribution. But the power of contribution goes far beyond a temporary boost in your mood. Shifting your focus away from yourself and aiming it toward the service of others actually alters your physical biology. It changes the structural integrity of your cells, fortifies your immune system, and extends your actual lifespan. When we feel overwhelmed by the relentless demands of daily life, our immediate instinct is to retreat. We cancel plans, we decline invitations to help our neighbors, and we tell ourselves that we just do not have the bandwidth to carry anyone else's burdens. We assume that helping others will completely drain our already depleted batteries. We view volunteering as a luxury reserved for people with perfectly balanced lives. The medical data proves this assumption is dangerously incorrect. Researchers at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health have extensively studied the biological impacts of regular volunteering and pro-social behavior. They did not just rely on psychological surveys, they analyzed massive data sets, tracking tens of thousands of older adults over multiple decades. They wanted to see what happened to the physical bodies of people who regularly dedicated their time to helping others, compared to those who lived isolated, self-focused lives. The results are absolutely staggering. A comprehensive meta-analysis published in the journal Psychology and Aging reviewed the data and found that older adults who volunteer experience a 24% lower risk of mortality compared to non-volunteers. Read that again. Giving your time away physically reduces your chances of dying by nearly a quarter. Another massive study analyzing data from the Health and Retirement Study found that dedicating just 2 hours a week, about 100 hours a year, to volunteer work resulted in profound physical transformations. The volunteers demonstrated significantly lower risks of physical functioning limitations. They maintained better mobility into old age, reported far lower levels of chronic physical pain, and exhibited vastly improved psychosocial well-being, including higher levels of optimism and a stronger sense of purpose. Why does this happen? Why does serving soup at a local shelter or mentoring a struggling child physically protect your heart and your joints? The answer lies in the destructive power of chronic stress and the immense biological healing power of connection. When you live a highly individualistic, self-obsessed life, your brain is constantly trapped in a continuous threat detection loop. You are always worried about your social status, your financial trajectory, and your personal happiness. This continuous, low-grade worry keeps your body flooded with cortisol, the primary stress hormone. Chronic cortisol exposure acts like acid in your bloodstream. It creates systemic inflammation, raises your blood pressure, and heavily damages your cardiovascular system. Most importantly, chronic stress accelerates the shortening of your telomeres. Telomeres are the protective caps on the ends of your DNA strands, functioning much like the plastic tips on the ends of shoelaces. Every time your cells divide, the telomeres get slightly shorter. When they become too short, the cell dies. Chronic stress rapidly burns through these protective caps, effectively accelerating the biological aging process. When you step outside of your own ego to help someone else, that biological threat detection system actively shuts down. Imagine standing in a drafty community center on a Saturday morning, helping pack heavy boxes of food for families in crisis. You are physically tired, your back might ache, and the work is entirely unglamorous. But look closely at your nervous system. You are surrounded by other people working shoulder to shoulder toward a shared, vital goal. Your brain recognizes that you are embedded in a functional tribe. You belong. The primal, evolutionary fear of being alone and vulnerable evaporates. As you connect with others and physically witness their struggles, your perspective radically shifts. The agonizing anxiety you felt earlier that morning about a rude email from your boss suddenly shrinks. It feels incredibly small and insignificant when placed next to the reality of genuine human hardship. Because your brain no longer perceives your personal inconveniences as massive survival threats, it stops pumping out toxic levels of cortisol. Instead, your brain releases oxytocin, the hormone responsible for social bonding and trust. Oxytocin is a biological miracle worker. It actively lowers blood pressure, reduces systemic inflammation, and physically heals damage in the cardiovascular system. By carrying someone else's burden, you do not crush yourself. You actually build the biological strength required to carry your own. This brings us to the ultimate necessary paradigm shift. If chasing personal happiness makes us miserable, if toxic positivity burns out our nervous system, and if isolating ourselves destroys our physical health, how do we fundamentally restructure our daily lives? We must implement the contribution reset. You must radically shift your internal operating system from mood-checking to meaning-making. This requires you to change the fundamental question you ask yourself the moment you wake up in the morning. Right now, when your alarm goes off, your brain likely defaults to the standard individualistic script. You scan your body and ask, how do I feel today? Am I happy? Do I have enough energy? What is the world going to give me today to make me feel good? If you want to experience genuine, unshakable fulfillment, you must ruthlessly cut that script out of your mind. You must fire the internal auditor. You must replace the selfish diagnostic with a singular, outward-facing demand. When your feet hit the floor in the morning, you ask, what is required of me today? How can I contribute? Meaning-making is not a passive emotional state. It is an active, structural framework for engaging with reality. Meaning is found at the exact intersection of your capabilities and the world's deep needs. When you operate from a framework of contribution, your physical posture in the world completely transforms. You walk into your workplace not as a fragile consumer demanding to be inspired by your boss, but as a producer, actively looking for a problem to solve. You walk into your home at the end of a long day, not as an exhausted victim demanding that your family cater to your stress, but as a provider looking to ease the friction of the household. This does not mean you become a martyr. It does not mean you allow people to abuse your generosity or drain your bank account. Boundaries are still necessary for survival, but it means you recognize that your greatest strength and your deepest, most enduring peace is activated only when you are profoundly useful. Think about the most resilient, deeply grounded people you have ever met in your life. They are rarely the people spending thousands of dollars on extreme self-care retreats in the desert. They are rarely the people constantly posting online about protecting their energy and cutting out toxic friends. The most resilient people are the ones who are profoundly engaged in something larger than themselves. They are the nurses who work grueling 12-hour shifts to comfort the dying. They are the parents who sacrifice their own sleep and personal ambitions to raise decent, kind children. They are the teachers, the builders, the volunteers, and the quiet neighbors who show up with a shovel when it snows, asking nothing in return. These people experience intense physical pain, deep exhaustion, and devastating grief, just like the rest of us. But they do not experience the hollow, crushing emptiness of the modern existential void. They do not have the time or the inclination to obsess over whether they are happy, because their hands are entirely full. When you shift to meaning-making, you finally put down the clipboard. You stop treating your life like a theatrical performance that must constantly be graded on a scale of joy. You give yourself the ultimate freedom, the freedom to forget about yourself. You begin to view your negative emotions not as fatal diseases that must be instantly cured, but as weather patterns passing over a deeply rooted mountain. The sharp anxiety will come, the heavy sadness will come, the restless boredom of the hedonic treadmill will come, and they will all eventually pass. Because your psychological foundation is no longer built on the fragile, shifting sands of how you feel, but on the solid, undeniable bedrock of what you do for others, the storms cannot tear you down. We must completely stop treating happiness as a target. It is an impossible target. The more fiercely you aim at it, the further away it moves, leaving you exhausted and bitter. Instead, aim at responsibility. Aim at connection. Aim at the messy, difficult, beautiful act of serving the people around you. Aim at doing a good job, not because you want a promotion or external validation, but because a job done well improves the overall fabric of reality. When you completely surrender the desperate, exhausting chase for personal joy, a strange and miraculous thing happens. You go about your day, you work hard, you help a friend navigate a crisis, you focus entirely on the task at hand, and then in a quiet, unexpected moment, perhaps while you are washing the dishes or walking to your car in the evening cold, or listening to someone you love tell a mundane story, you will feel a sudden, quiet warmth bloom in the center of your chest. You won't have forced it. You won't have aggressively manipulated your environment to create it. You won't have written it down in a gratitude journal. It will simply arrive. Happiness cannot be chased, demanded, or bought. It only ever sneaks in through the back door, quietly taking a seat in the room while you are busy focusing on someone else. Fulfillment arrives the moment you stop obsessing over your own joy and start contributing to others. But you cannot effectively build that meaningful life if your attention is constantly fractured. Discover why your brain is actively working against you right now by clicking on "Multitasking is killing your brain." Do this instead.